I studied, my roommate Bob Duvall studied, we hung out with Gene Hackman, he studied, we each studied with different acting teachers. I had Lee Strasberg, Bob had Sandy Meisner. These were brilliant teachers, and Gene Hackman had his own teacher, George Morrison, and there was also Stella Adler. What I say to actors when they say, who should I study with? Should I study? I say, yes, because what else are you going to do? You get up every day, you can't write, you can't paint, you can't practice piano. You know, you have to have a job. And if you don't have a job, you have to be able to have scenes to do. We did things in our day, Duvall and I, yes, we picked those, sometimes we picked the classes to study which we thought had the best looking girls, but that's the main reason you go into acting anyway. And those girls would never go out with us, but if they thought you were talented, they'd do a love scene with you, which is always a step in the right direction. But we don't get me going. But we had poetry readings every week at one of our apartments, and we'd memorize poems, or we'd read them. We would do anything we could to act. And that's why sometimes I've said acting classes are really a way for actors pay other actors to be their audience. You need an audience. You must have an audience to work out. You can't just go up and down the streets memorizing Shakespeare monologues. You can, but I mean, you need this outlet. It's a performance art. And what I have said to actors, first, I think you should audit classes in the town you live in. You can find out who the acting teachers are. That's not hard. And even if you have to go to some little theaters there and say, who do you study with? Or if you see a performance, go backstage. Can you tell? I mean, just do it. And audit those classes, meaning sit in and watch the vibe, then ask to meet the acting teacher and talk to him. And they say, so who should I choose? Choose the one who thinks you've got something. That's number one. It's hard enough to be an actor and to wonder from day to day whether it's worth it. Am I talented? Am I not talented? You know, you're a fraud 90% of the time to yourself. That's just the state of being any kind of artist, because there's nothing definitive. I rarely meet actors who agree on what the method is, and unfortunately they have the Lee Strasberg Institute here, the Institute, and you don't know who's teaching there. Oh, I studied with someone who studied with Strasberg. It becomes like third generation, and I don't quite know if they know. And the method was derived from Stanislavski's, your body is your instrument, that's all. You practice the piano, you practice scales. We have our memories, and those memories, it doesn't, as therapists will tell you, well, I don't know if I'm remembering correctly. And a good therapist will tell you, this happened when I was a kid. Well, it doesn't matter if it's correct or not. It's what you think is correct. It's what you remember. That's where the money is. That's how you're gonna disengage whatever fucked up part of you you're trying to work at that day. And so these are tools, meaning that there are parts of your brain which you can have access to, which can deliver the same sensations as, let's say, LSD or acid, which after all, those are just chemicals which are stimulating parts of your brain which are already there. It's not your brain that you're infusing, it's chemicals which are activating the parts that are already there. And that synesthesia is a way of getting at that. So in a sense, that's what the method was supposed to be. How can I recreate heat if there's no heat? And if it's supposed to be a really hot day, how can I recreate a sense of cold if I'm supposed to be cold and we're shooting on a set? It's the side's going brr, and this is one of the exercises, effective memory. I thought was quite legitimate because we know what that's like, just as human beings. If there's a smell that we recall, that smell when we were 5 years old, the day our grandparent died or way, but it can bring forth an emotional response. We've all experienced that. Oh my God, what is that? It stays with us. And so these are simple, I could go on and on, but these are simple exercises. There's a wonderful exercise that Strasberg taught, relaxation exercises, the inability that we have to know whether we're relaxed or not. And it would be a song exercise that you would stand up in front of a class and you would sing a song with your hands at your sides. And you would do each one syllable as long as you could, but you had to make eye contact. Tree. So you're trying to be physically relaxed and you're trying to let whatever is there come out. It's a legitimate exercise because we're anything but relaxed. I mean, I had to start work yesterday with the actors. I could fear, I could slip, I could fear, I could feel my heart in my throat. My heart was pounding. I was scared to death or whatever. We just are. And then finally, I started to get, so you stand up and you're doing, tree, tis, making out, and sometimes people would start laughing, sometimes they start crying, and you just keep the exercise going. You don't realize how much stuff is there once you allow it. Because when we grimace, this is a way of keeping the emotion in life. We're constantly doing that. I mean, it's very dangerous in life to show your vulnerability. And many times Strasberg would come up and stand in back of the student as he's doing it, and your hands are at your sides, and he would lift your arms up sometimes, and then be holding them. And the students keep going, and he'd let go, and their hands are still up, and they're not aware of it. He says, let go. What let go what? Your arms are still, or one hand. And he'd have to, it was quite exciting to see that you aren't relaxed when you think you are, that there was such self-consciousness and self-protection, if you will, and then suddenly they would let it go, and then the stuff would start to happen. Mary Tarsai, I'm sitting in her class watching, and I think she's good and everything, and then I get up to do a scene. Vivid memory of this. I'm like 20 years old, and I'm doing this. And I worked hard. I learned the lines. I mean, as I said, it was the first thing I could ever really focus on. And she starts talking to me during the scene. Oh, you dropped it. You dropped your energy. Pick it up. And I, like this, and I keep going on to do the scene with the girl, and she keeps interrupting. And I hadn't heard her do that before with other actors, so it was a shocker to me. And suddenly I turned on her, and I went from my toes, and I just started screaming at the top of my lungs. Later, it took me much later to learn in therapy, that was all the screaming I could never do at my father. And I let her have it. Don't you dare ever interrupt me again when I'm doing this. Nobody, this struggling actor, you want to talk to me, you let me finish the scene. Don't you ever interrupt me again. Screaming top of my lungs. Do not take this, I will not let you take this away from me. And she called me, I walked out, she called me in her room, whatever, said I can't come back. And I never did come back. I then struggled. I wound up with Strasberg 3 years later. I'm in his class, 60 people there. And every time I would watch a scene, you're lucky if you got up every 6 weeks, 2 months, you'd watch a scene. He was always saying the same thing. I don't care about the scene. I don't want you to try to make the scene work. I want to know the sensory things you worked on. Were you working for cold? Were you working for heat? Were you using an effective memory or something? I want to know what you were working on and where. So I was so proud of myself because I'm 23 or whatever, and I said, ooh, I'm not even going to pick a scene out of a play. I'm going to pick a scene called Soap. from a James T. Farrell short story. Great writer who I loved in those days. He wrote Studs Lonigan, which I thought was a magnificent a book about a kid who was a house painter. And Soap is about a guy who is in a garret with his girlfriend. And he's a painter, and he's so poor, he can't afford soap. So naturally, I'm doing the scene. And I wrote out the lines from the short story. No one had done that in class. I always wanted to do something that no one else did before. They were all doing scenes from plays. I'm going to do a short story, pick out, And afterwards, he's 70 people sitting there, and he's saying, so, he always had like a tick, so what were you working on? And I said, well, it's called Soap, and I can't afford soap, so I was working, I hadn't bathed, whatever, and my armpits stink, and this, that, and the other. And he suddenly says, and what happened to the scene? And I just look at him. I said, what? He says, but there's no scene. The scene went out the window. And he hit the Harry Hoffman, my father button, and I exploded. No one had ever exploded at Lee Strasberg. Trust me. And it was, as I said, I didn't have a choice. And I just said, I've been coming here for over a year. I've seen scenes. I mean, I was yelling. And I said, I've seen scenes here. And you have always said constantly, over and over again, don't try to make the scene work. I just be working. You're not doing something on Broadway. We're doing exercises. And you say to me, where's the scene? I can do the scene. You don't want the scene. I know how to play the scene. If you want me to try to make the scene work. And there again is this deathly silence. Who is this crazy maniac? And then he did something. He just looked at me. He said, okay, next time, do the scene.